Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akiri. The headlines. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky passes peace plan letter to China's President Xi Jinping through First Lady Zelena at Davos. The Kremlin says any meeting between its spy chief and the CIA head would make sense. And NATO deploys surveillance planes to Romania to monitor Russian activity. We begin from Davos in Switzerland, where Ukraine's First Lady, speaking at the World Economic Forum, has insisted that she would deliver a letter from her husband, President Volodymyr Zelensky, to Chinese President Xi Jinping, containing Ukraine's peace formula to end the 11-month war with Russia. Neither Mr. Zelensky nor Mr. Xi were in attendance at the World Economic Forum in Davos, where Mrs. Olena Zelensky said the letter would be delivered to the Chinese letter via the country's Vice Premier, Liu He, who was in attendance.
Today, I will give to colleagues participating here formula letters from the Ukrainian President to the Swiss President, Mr. Alain Berset, President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, and the leader of the Chinese Republic, Mr. Xi Jinping, which I give through Vice President Liu He. How does the world expect to reach climate neutrality if it can't even stop the burning down of whole Ukrainian cities? This is what Russia does with its artillery, missiles, Iranian drones. You all know that Russian aggression was never intended to stop at Ukrainian borders. This war can move forward and ignite wider crisis if Ukraine loses. This is about thousands of children who we have to protect from losing contact with their relatives and motherland, which is what Russia does to them, by giving away thousands of children for unlawful adoption into Russian families. This is not just an attempt to wipe away the memory about who they actually are. This is a crime against the essence of parenthood, against what united mother and child, father and child for centuries.
Ukrainian First Lady Olena Zelensky speaking in Davos. Meanwhile, the Kremlin says that any possible meeting between Russia's Foreign Intelligence Chief Sergei Naryshkin and U.S. Central Intelligence Agency Director William Burns would make sense, but stated that he was not aware of any concrete date for such a meeting. The Kremlin spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, said, quote, "It can't be ruled out," and of course this kind of dialogue makes sense. Mr. Naryshkin, the head of Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service, met Mr. Burns in Ankara, Turkey, in November last year. And U.S. President Joe Biden and Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte have concluded a meeting at the White House with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, protection of supply chains, and an upcoming summit for democracy hosted by the two countries, along with Costa Rica, South Korea, and Zambia topping the agenda. The wide-ranging meeting was also planned as the United States has sought to shore up allies' support for restrictions that aim to limit China's ability to access advanced computer chips, develop and maintain supercomputers, as well as make advanced semiconductors. In a statement following the meeting, the White House did not directly reference the issue, but said the two leaders discussed, quote, "the importance of secure supply chains and critical technologies to our national security and economic prosperity." And staying in the White House, it is teased that additional Ukrainian aid could be announced as soon as the end of this week, while vowing to work to hold President Vladimir Putin responsible for any war crimes committed during Russia's invasion of the country. National Security Council Coordinator for Strategic Communications, John Kirby, says the U.S. was focused on trying to make sure that it gives Ukraine what it needs in the fight so that they're in. He adds that the U.S. had been very, very clear and honest about the fact that the Russian armed forces continues to commit atrocities and war crimes and would work with the international community to hold Russia accountable. And Ukrainian troops have launched Polish Crab howitzers in the eastern Donetsk region. The artillery brigade in command of the howitzers said they aimed to hit Russian troops assaulting Ukrainian positions. The Ukrainian military regulations prohibit the identification of the exact firing positions in the Donetsk region. But a service member going by the nom de guerre Yarta said that his 26th Separate Artillery Brigade fired shells onto Russian troops storming Ukrainian positions, allowing Ukraine to conduct counter operations. And there's still a lot of activity as NATO surveillance planes have arrived in Romania to bolster the military alliance's eastern flank and help monitor Russian military activity. German airborne warning and control system surveillance planes landed at an airbase in Otopeni near Bucharest and are due to stay for several weeks. The aircraft belong to a fleet of 14 NATO AWAC aircraft based in Germany.
As the German ambassador to Romania, I take a great pride in the fact that there is a strong German footprint in this NATO mission. The AWACS airplanes are usually deployed in Geilenkirchen in Germany, sent from Germany to Bucharest. Today, this mission is led by General Neumann, and a large part of the soldiers involved are also German. So this also gives me an opportunity to show and to reiterate once more Germany stands side by side with Romania in these very challenging times, and given the fact that Romania is bordering a war theater right across in Ukraine.
And the Netherlands plans to join the United States and Germany in sending a Patriot missile defense system to Ukraine. The Prime Minister, Mark Rutte, made the announcement during a meeting with U.S. President Joe Biden at the White House, as has already been reported. Mr. Rutte said, quote, "We have the intention to join what you are doing with Germany on the Patriots project. I think that is important that we join that," adding that he's already discussed the issue with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. And 3 British Chinook helicopters have landed in Estonia to bolster Baltic defense capabilities. The Chinooks are mainly used by the British Royal Air Force to transport troops and cargo and have defensive capabilities. The helicopters were deployed by the United Kingdom to reinforce the Estonian defense plan. They will be integrated into exercises led by NATO enhanced forward presence multinational battle groups based in Tapa.
We always have to be prepared. And NATO is a defense alliance, and alliance as itself has to be ready for all kinds of threats. And as we know, the only threat to NATO as an alliance in this region can come from Russia. So this is why we have to be prepared. This is why Estonia is putting 2.8% from GDP this year. Next year, 3.2% to our defense. And we are putting a lot of efforts to build up our own army. But as I said, some of the gaps we have to fill with our good allies. This means Brits, this means Americans, this means French troops are here, also Danes are here. So this is what we are doing to give the security to all our people.
It's actually an allied effort. So the UK is doing more here in Estonia. We're increasing the size of our headquarters. There'll be a brigadier arriving soon to be in charge of all our troops. We also had increased contributions from the Danes and the French. The Americans have brought a HIMARS platoon and an infantry company, which is a really positive development, I think. So overall, combine that with what Estonia is doing and the amount that Estonia is investing in its own defence, it means that NATO has a really, really strong forward defence, which is what's needed at this time.
And the head of the United Nations nuclear watchdog, Rafael Grossi, says that an IAEA team would establish a continuous presence at Ukraine's Rivne nuclear power plant. The International Atomic Energy Agency's chief is visiting Ukraine in the hopes of making progress on a safe zone deal around the Russian-controlled Zaporizhzhia plant, adding that the team would be checking the physical integrity of the Rivne plant.
In preparation for my personal visit, we were able to sent a preparatory mission, an advanced mission, that prepared a report indicating and praising, in fact, the outstanding work of the Director General and all the staff here for the way in which the plant has been operating in spite of the war. That doesn't mean that there are no problems and that there are no needs. There are things where we can work together. There are certain requirements and certain equipment or processes where the joint work between this power plant and the IAEA, with the support of the regulator, the Ukrainian regulator, we can provide a better, I would say, overall circumstance for the plant to continue to operate in spite of these difficulties imposed by the war.
In the meantime, British Foreign Minister James Cleverly will seek to boost support for Ukraine during a trip to the United States ahead of the first anniversary of the invasion by Russia. Britain, which has been a steadfast supporter of Kyiv since Russia's invasion last February, recently pledged to send 14 Challenger 2 tanks and other heavy weaponry to Ukraine.
It's because we need to send a really clear message. And the message we're sending to Putin, and frankly anyone else that cares to be watching, is that we made a commitment to support the Ukrainians until they were victorious. This is what they need to get the job done. This is what we're going to supply, and we're going to supply modern, heavy military equipment and the ammunition to allow them to defend themselves properly. And what Putin should understand is we are going to have the strategic endurance to stick with them until the job is done. And the best thing that he can do to preserve the lives of his own troops is to recognise that we're going to stick with the Ukrainians until they are victorious and bring this war to a conclusion and get around the negotiating table in good faith, and not the not these kind of performative things that he's been doing up until now, because that will save lives and frankly it will save money. And so we want to make sure Ukraine is victorious. We want to make sure that they are successful sooner rather than later. And Putin should realise that his ambitions will not be realised. We will not let him realise his ambitions. And this is why, and I keep repeating this, it's the best moral thing to do to bring this to a conclusion.
And a former commander of Russia's Wagner mercenary group who fought in Ukraine said he has fled to Norway and is seeking asylum in fear for his life after witnessing the killing and mistreatment of Russian prisoners brought to the front line. Andrei Medvedev, who joined the group on July 6, 2022, on a 4-month-long contract, said he had slipped away from the group after witnessing the killing of captured deserters from the group. Mr. Medvedev, an orphan who joined the Russian army and served time in prison before joining Wagner, added that he crossed the border, climbing through barbed wire fences and evading a border patrol with dogs, and heard guards firing shots as he ran through a forest and over thin and breaking ice into Norway. Norwegian police said a foreign citizen had been arrested on the night of Thursday to Friday after illegally crossing the Russian-Norwegian border in the Arctic and was seeking asylum. Meanwhile, Serbian President Alexander Vučić has condemned Russian mercenary force Wagner for trying to recruit soldiers from his country after the group ran a local media advertisement for Serbs to fight in Ukraine. The criticism marks a rare public rebuke from the Serbian leader towards Russia, a steadfast ally of the Balkan country. Mr. Vučić slammed Russia's websites and social media groups for publishing adverts in Serbian language in which the Wagner group called on volunteers to join its ranks. The Serbian legislature has, however, banned the participation of its citizens in conflicts abroad, and several people have been sentenced for doing so. And Russia's permanent representative to the United Nations, Vasily Nebenzia, says during a UN Security Council meeting that Ukraine's Secretary of National Security and Defense, Oleksiy Danilov, called Russians rats and swine dogs. During the open debate imposed by Russia to discuss the situation of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, Mr. Nebenzia also said in 2021, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky asked Russians living in Ukraine to leave the territory. Russia invaded Ukraine on February the 24th, 2022, starting a war that has killed tens of thousands of people and displaced millions. And Ukraine's presidential advisor, Oleksiy Arestovich, has offered his resignation after suggesting a Russian missile which hit a building in Dnipro, killing 44 people, was shot down by Kyiv. Mr. Arestovich apologized and said he had made a fundamental error. The original remark caused widespread anger in the country and was used by Russian officials to blame Ukraine. However, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has not yet commented on Mr. Arestovich's decision to resign. And coming up after the break, we've got Stephen Hayes joining us. Plus, Germany appoints defense chief in time for Kyiv-Ukraine meeting. Details in a moment. Please stay on with us. Staying tuned, a warm welcome back. Let's now talk to Mr. Stephen Hayes, who is, of course, president of Cohen and Woods International. Stephen is also president emeritus, Corporate Council on Africa, and former president of the American Center on International Leadership. Good morning to you, Stephen. Happy New Year.
Good morning to you too, Lottie. Nice to see you again.
And of course, Stephen is joining us from Washington, D.C., I believe it is. I believe I'm correct, yep. Stephen. That is, yes. That is right. Now, all along, this conflict is today, almost 11 months old. But for most people, it started suddenly, and then it has dragged on and on and on and on. So as promised late last year, today, I want to tap your experience and take a look at Russia. Most of what we have heard on the conflict so far in the last 11 months has come from Ukraine and its Western allies. Perhaps it would be useful to understand some of the historical background to what brought this up. The Soviet Union was dissolved in 1991. I believe Boris Yeltsin was subsequently to emerge as its president. And it was from him that Vladimir Putin took over at the very end of 1999. And he has been president ever since then. But do you think that going down its history, taking a look at its history, the Russians seem to have always had this fear of being encircled down history?
Well, absolutely. They've had to fight invasions, not just the last 100 years, but it goes back 700 years, the Mongol invasion. Even before that, there were smaller fiefdoms that were that the Moscow, then Muscovy, was fighting off. So historically, they've had always to repel invasions. The Germans certainly were one example, the Mongols especially, which changed the whole atmosphere and the geography, in fact, of what Russia was to become. So historically, that's been within the culture of Russia. I think that there's been more to it than only that, but that certainly has played a role. The other aspect of this that I found interesting, that most people don't realize there's a long-term animosity between Ukraine and Russia that goes back a very long way. The establishment, for instance, of the Russian Orthodox Church was really based in Kyiv, and eventually Moscow became the center. But because the Russian Orthodox Church plays such a role in Russia, there's always been that rivalry between Ukraine and Russia as well. And then, of course, the Peter the Great and the Greater Russia Empire, which was established, has been one that Russia has tried to protect as well. So it's a long-standing psychological impact and in fact some pride in Russia.
The other thing, of course, is that we have heard repeatedly down the line people talking about President Vladimir Putin being an autocrat and not necessarily a Democrat, even though he does, participate in elections, and he has been elected a couple of times, both as president. But I wonder if that isn't in keeping with, again, Russian history, because many people will be surprised, perhaps, to learn that Russia had kings who were known as Tsars, and then when the communists took over, Lenin, Stalin, Khrushchev, Brezhnev, Andropov, Chernenko, and then, of course, Gorbachev, were all dictators. None of those people were elected to the positions that they held. So there is some background to all of this in a Russian society, isn't there?
But that's true too. I've always felt that even when the Communist Party came in, it simply, in a way, it renamed the Tsarist Russia. Because again, the strong man has always been the way that Russia has ruled. The democracy is, at least democracy is voting, is actually an anomaly in Russian culture. So it's really, I mean, they had votes during the communist days, but those votes were 100% predictable. And the elections since Putin came in have been fairly predictable too, probably not as extreme as it was during the communist times. So the idea of a strong leader has been ingrained into Russian culture for hundreds of years, and that I think that also helps explain it. The fact is that too, Russia and Putin is simply not. Not a Democrat. That's not necessarily bad or good. It's just in describing him, he came from a very the KGB culture, which frankly the czars also had their own secret police, which the KGB simply replaced in many ways. So again, even KGB goes way back in terms of culture, although the structure and the names, but the secret police close to the strongman has always been a part of Russian culture. So Putin comes out of that culture, and I think that he also seeks, well, I think no, it's fairly common, he seeks a return to greater Russia. And he was quoted as saying that the greatest mistake that the Russians made was the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And from his point of view, I understand that. And I think he's still wanting to return to the greater Russia.
Now, of course, the Russians have always been suspicious as well, going down history, of the West. I mean, even when they teamed up during World War II, after Germany invaded Russia, which you referenced a little bit earlier on, invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, Stalin and FDR and Churchill came together to form this alliance with which they defeated Germany and Japan then at the end of the Second World War. But all through that time, there was a suspicion, even within the Soviet Union, that this alliance was one of convenience, and that as soon as the situation settled, the West was going to return to trying to contain the Soviet Union. All that has continued down history, hasn't it?
But it has, and both parties may have good reasons for their suspicions. Russia was expansionist, particularly the revolution, when they started absorbing other states, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and the stands, Kyrgyzstan, etc., are all absorbed into the communist as well. So there was a concern about that, and then during that period also there was the great, I guess, psychological war of those who feared communism, and on the other side, those who feared capitalism. So the suspicions on both sides have been there for years and years. And again, it's, as I say, just because you may be paranoid doesn't mean that you don't have enemies. So there is that history, and it's also, I think, going to continue for beyond our lifetime. Frankly, the key is how do you deal with it, and how do you begin over time to change a culture, the way of thinking. And I don't mean just simply the Russian way of thinking, but our way of looking at the world as well. We've got to find ways to make this world work.
The West, and quite a number of people have said that this conflict could have been nipped in the bud as way back as 2014 when Russia went into Crimea, and that the West looked away at the time. The Western powers now back in Ukraine looked away at the time when that happened in 2014. They didn't do anything. And that in subsequently when Russia went into eastern Ukraine to back separatist rebels there, mainly in the Russian-speaking parts of Ukraine. Again, the West didn't really stand up and to be counted. That so now, standing up now that there's all-out war appears to, have been an afterthought, and because they now believe that their own interests were at stake. Is that a fair comment, do you think?
Yes, I do think. I think that we set back. I don't think anyone was prepared to go to war. I think it surprised some, and so I think it makes me think about the 1930s also, when Chamberlain thought we had peace in our time by giving Hitler the half of Czechoslovakia, thinking that ceding Czechoslovakia to the Germans with the assurance that that's all that Hitler wanted, and then went back and reported that we have peace in our time, and obviously we didn't. It was the first of many steps of expansionist Germany at that time. So it seems to me that there is a valid comparison on that. Only did Hitler be defeated was when the Allies stood up to him, including the Russians, as well as the so-called West.
There are other complications, and now I want to bring you back to the present. You are talking to me from Washington in the United States. And again, the politics within the United States has a lot to do with Ukraine. Some of the documents, we are told, that have been found, some of the classified documents found in President Biden's garage, one or two have been said to have to do with Ukraine. Of course, we all know about the story of his son Hunter's relationship with a Ukrainian company called Burisma. On the other hand, President Trump, former President Trump, has a very robust relationship, shall we say, with Russia. And he was known during his time as president to be a strong admirer of President Putin. Now, how much of that do you think is going to come into play, especially because both these men are touted as going to be the main candidates yet again come next year's presidential election?
Well, I think it's going to play quite a bit into the political fight that's coming up. I still think that most of the Republican Party in Congress will support the war in Ukraine, but there's clearly a small faction of influential detractors to that who seem to also have an empathy with Russia. And I think that's going to play into the political debate. How our new Speaker of the House manages the relationship not only within his own party, which looks like it's going to be very difficult relationships to manage, but also how he manages the relationship with President Biden. As I said, earlier, when we talked last too, I think that the Attorney General here did the right thing, and we do have to know about the papers that were, I'd hope, very carelessly left in Biden's home and garage, I guess, when he was vice president. So I think those questions will be asked. I think they need to be answered. It's probably not going to be answered to one group or another's satisfaction, because the split in the United States between Republicans and Democrats is so severe right now. But that's also another relationship that's going to have to be far better managed. How it affects Ukraine, I don't know yet. I don't think anyone knows, but I think I still am more positive that the relationship, the U.S. will continue its support. I think that even the strongest of critics understand that we are now in this, and our own reputation, international reputation, is at stake as well. So I think there's needs to be a number of dialogues going on. Watching the news broadcast before I came on, also there were bits of encouragement to that. If our intelligence chief is meeting with the Russian intelligence chief, I think dialogue helps, no matter what. At least helps understanding. I think it's interesting that the Ukrainians have decided, or Zelensky has decided to send his proposal through China, which actually could help China quite a bit in terms of face, in terms of being the a key to ending this war. It's just all becoming very interesting. It's a giant, more than interesting. It's a giant chess match that has tremendous ramifications. Probably the most dangerous time in our history, to the potential of what could happen.
Now, Stephen, you are President Emeritus of the Corporate Council on Africa. And so not only do you have experience in the trade and other relationships in Russia and in Ukraine, you are also quite familiar with those on the African continent. One of the, I don't want to call it a side benefit, but one of the things that has come out of this is that Africa has come to realize the importance of Ukraine. Before this conflict, Africa, of course, many countries in Africa had quite a robust relationship with Russia already, right. But Ukraine was now brought to the fore as a result of this conflict. Now, the question perhaps is that in supplying food, and now the buzzword is food security, Ukraine is so critical not just to Africa, but to Asia and other countries. What lessons do you think there are in building, for example, trade relationships between Africa and Ukraine, and even improving those with Russia, because this conflict will end. We don't know when, but it will end, and life will get back to some sort of normalcy. So at that point, what are the lessons learned, and what are the potentials you think there are for all the parties involved?
Well, I think an important lesson is the fact that Ukraine has learned that Africa is important. I don't think that they had that same sense. They simply hadn't had enough embassies around. Suddenly they're now moving and increasing their number of embassies and diplomatic presence in Africa. So I think Ukraine has now realized that Africa is far more important than perhaps they were taking for granted. The food situation worldwide, I think that's been an important lesson. The fact that I don't think most of the world realize that half of Africa's grain comes from Ukraine and Russia. So it's in the African interest to see this war ending as well. I think that there's a lot of potential in terms of increase in trade after this is over. I think there's going to be more broad-based dialogue, certainly. And I think that Africa could benefit significantly after this war is over. Right now, this war is going to impinge upon Africa as well. It already has in terms of the food supply in the Horn of Africa. Some food is reaching that, but there's still the corn harvest, for instance, of Ukraine hasn't been completed now, and that corn also goes largely to Africa. But because of the war, the corn cannot be harvested. So how that is going to affect food supply and supply chains in Africa remains to be seen. But I think another benefit of this is that I think Africa realizes and will realize more and more the importance of agriculture on their own continent. Again, Africa could supply the entire world food supply, and it could be an enormous economic boon, and will be in the long term. So I think that all this is opportunity, but the war has to be stopped as soon as possible. Otherwise, the ramifications are going to be tremendous and could be extraordinarily tragic for the world.
Indeed, Stephen Hayes, thank you so much for allowing us to tap into your vast experience and historical knowledge of this situation. It's been a most enlightening session. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for getting up so early to be able to join us from Washington. We're quite
Thank you,
we're quite
Lonnie.
happy.
It's always a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Germany has appointed a new defense minister as pressure mounts on Berlin to allow European nations to send German-made Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine. The government of Chancellor Olaf Scholz has named Boris Pistorius as the defense chief to replace Christian Lambrecht, who resigned a day earlier. Mr. Pistorius, from Mr. Scholz's governing Social Democratic Party, will leave his position as the Interior Minister of the state of Lower Saxony. He gained a national profile during the 2015 refugee crisis and is known for taking a hard line on security issues. Mr. Pistorius' appointment comes before a meeting planned for Friday at the United States Ramstein Air Base in southwestern Germany, where Ukraine's allies are expecting to discuss boosting military support for Kyiv. And Ukraine's top general said he had his first ever in-person meeting with his U.S. counterpart, General Mark Milley, in Poland. Later this week, General Milley will attend the next meeting of the Ukraine Contact Group in Ramstein when the U.S. and approximately 50 other countries come together to pledge new support to Ukraine. Earlier in the week, General Milley saw the newly expanded combined arms training of Ukrainian forces in Germany. The meeting between the generals comes a day after Ukrainian troops arrived at Fort Sill in Oklahoma to begin training on the Patriot missile defense system. And the United States has imposed a raft of visa restrictions on Belarusian officials over the government's, quote, continued repression of opposition figures, including democracy icons Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya and Nobel Prize winner Ales Baliatsky. The restrictions target 25 individuals, bringing the total number of Belarusians facing U.S. visa bans for undermining democracy to 322, says President Alexander Lukashenko, who was re-elected in 2020 in landslide polls dismissed by the opposition and foreign observers, including the U.S. government and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, as a sham. Rights activists have estimated that about 1,500 people currently remain in jail in Belarus on charges considered to be politically motivated. And more than 9,000 Ukrainians, including 453 children, have been killed since Russia's invasion 11 months ago, according to the Ukrainian presidential aide Andriy Yermak. Mr. Yermak announced the grim toll at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, adding, quote, we have registered 80,000 crimes committed by Russian invaders. Mr. Yermak reiterated calls for a special international tribunal to try Russia and reparations for the destruction caused by the invasion. On Monday, the United Nations said more than 7,000 civilians had been killed. And we'll take a break now, and when we return, we'll take the business discussion of this conflict for the day. Plus, Australian Open bans Russian flags after Ukrainian ambassador's objections. Please stay on with us. Welcome back. Before we take Laddie Williams and the business news, there's breaking news coming out of Kyiv, the Ukrainian capital, where we understand at least 16 people have been killed after a helicopter crashed beside a kindergarten in an eastern suburb of the capital city. Ukrainian Interior Minister Denis Monorytsky, his deputy and another official were among the 16 killed. National Police Chief Ihor Klimenko said 9 of the dead had been on board the aircraft, which crashed near the kindergarten and residential buildings in the eastern suburbs of Brovary. 2 of those killed were children, and another 22 are in the hospital. Very tragic news. Let's take Laddie Williams at this point. Morning, Laddie.
Morning.
The Russians are posting a record current account surplus of almost $230 billion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Quite.
I was going to say that's not really a surprise, is it?
Yeah, not really, but obviously we know the experts, had, other expectations.
Ideas about what was going to happen.
And ideas, and we're seeing it play out, already, and it's a big surplus. It's the difference between money inflows into the country from transfers, revenue from sales, and monies that actually, leave
Leaving
the country.
the country, yeah.
So it's a surplus. And one thing that would have led to this is, obviously exports of all Russian exports have been, dwarfed. They're mostly exporting foods and oil and gas, at this point. And obviously we know the whole issue with the cap and prices and all of that. So that has, aided them, in also having this surplus. It's a big one, about 80% up from 2021. But, poor data still when it comes to exports, because at the end of the day, you want to be able to export, most of the things you actually produce in your country. But with the exodus of, companies, out of Russia, that has impacted, how much they're able to export and, what they're able to produce, at this time. Critical inputs, the sanctions, and able to get critical inputs for their manufacturing. So we're seeing this. It's good data, but, obviously that also impacted their GDP,
right?
Because the forecast was that the economy would decline by about 15 to 10%, but we're not seeing that. It's about 2.1%. So for Putin, that's a win. He was bragging about that, in his address. So at the end of the day, we're seeing all that data rolling in for 2020.
But they're
some good,
but it seems as if they want to impose some kind of export ban, food export restriction kind of thing.
It's still coming from that his address. He did hint on trying to stabilize their own food
internal market.
Exactly, to make sure that they have enough, going into 2023, because he's expecting that the weather would impact, yields, agricultural yields in this year. So he's coming out to say, you know what, we might have to not export everything, that we're making.
that we're making, and obviously, keep some for home consumption.
Yeah, and some are hinting that, he might be talking about turning off another tap, to unfriendly nations. And this time looks like he might be hinting at food. And obviously this will have, a huge impact on countries that rely on Russia for agro, products. But, we're still watching, but, he has hinted at this, and obviously the market will be watching to see what his next move would be. But this is a big hint, and everyone's going to take it seriously.
A lot of people are going to take, they're going to take that. How are global markets looking today, though?
Not looking bad today. We see the FTSE actually in the green this morning. We did get that inflation data from the UK showing that it declined again, which is good news. We're seeing, a lot of these global leaders there.
The biggest people who will be relieved will be the central bankers.
Exactly. So that might, we might see the BOE maybe less aggressive, with their next interest rate meeting. So it's a good month-on-month, decline, and the expectation is inflation will continue declining for most of these economies, but investors are still cautious because
very, very cautious.
Anything can change,
Indeed,
going forward.
Of course, Laddie and the crew will have more of that later on, right after the show, in fact, on Business Morning and later on Business Incorporated. Thanks, Laddie.
Thank you.
And finally, let's take a look at the sports news out of here. Tennis Australia has announced that fans will no longer be allowed to bring the Russian or Belarusian flags to the site of the Australian Open. The decision comes after Ukraine's ambassador to Australia strongly condemned the Russian flag being displayed in the stands at the Grand Slam. Tennis Australia wrote in a statement, flags from Russia and Belarus are banned on site at the Australian Open. Our initial policy was that fans could bring them in but could not use them to cause disruption. Yesterday, we had an incident where a flag was placed courtside. The ban is effective immediately. We will continue to work with the players and our fans to ensure the best possible environment to enjoy the tennis. The flag was seen during the first round match between Ukraine's Katerina Bandel and Russia's Kamila Rakimova in Melbourne. That's where we end this morning's show. Thanks for being with us. My name is Ladi Akiri Doluale. To go out there and have yourselves a wonderful day ahead. Good morning.